A sleepy town where children's laughter bounces off brick walls and dogs chase each other through sunlit yards. The smell of fresh pies drifts from the local shop and neighbours wave, share stories and check in on each other. It feels safe, familiar, ordinary. But beneath the calm, one woman's anger, jealousy and need for control threads through the town like smoke. Men, families and a community, none left untouched by the brutal imagery that refuses to fade. This is the collision of the ordinary and the terrifying, love and violence, safety and danger, and the story of a darkness that reaches far beyond the walls of a home. Welcome to If These Trees Could Talk.
We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, the Wonnarua people, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We recognise their continuing connection to this land, its waterways and its seasons. The Hunter Valley has a long history of close-knit community. It has long been a place where families live and work together, where neighbours look out for one another. Today, as we explore the shadows that have touched this land, we honour not only the resilience of the Wonnarua and Gamilaroi nations, but also the communities and the individuals affected by the darker chapters of our valley's history.
Instead of a swift slice, she would nick an artery and let the animals bleed out slowly. You better watch this one or she'll fucking kill you. People are going to continue to die, whether it's at their own hands or at the hands of somebody who is clearly not fucking okay. She was the most wonderful wife you could wish for, but sometimes she'd just snap like a biscuit. This episode contains detailed discussions of childhood and domestic abuse, sexual assault, extreme violence, and graphic descriptions of criminal behaviour. It explores traumatic events in the life of Katherine Knight, including abuse towards children, intimate partner violence, and threats with weapons. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
Turn it off now, kids.
It's not one for the kiddos. No. We're about to take a little journey, and I'm assuming that most people will have heard about Katherine and the extremely brutal murder of her partner, John Price. We took a trip to Gundy a few weeks ago, camped up there at the pub at the base of the Barringtons, and it's so incredibly beautiful up there. But to get there, we drove through Aberdeen, and I think about this every time I drive through that town.
Me too.
Yeah, about John and the way that his life ended and his children and what they've had to face, but also the wider community, because if a crime like this can shock us in the way that it does, imagine those people in that small community who, you know, they all knew each other. A lot of them worked together. They drank together at the pub. And I don't know how a community recovers from something like that. You know, we're a way on now, but I don't know if you ever forget. If I think about it, clearly they do.
Mm. And a gorgeous little town too.
It absolutely is a gorgeous town. I'm trying to come at this story with a respect for everybody involved. And there's some rough stuff in here. So if today is a day that you're feeling particularly vulnerable, maybe save this for later or not at all. It's completely up to you. We're not going to tell you what to put into your ears, but this one's a doozy.
So I'm going to make my first real producer call here, Shannon. This is something that we've added post-recording to the beginning of this episode.
Megan got a cranky voice on with me and she said it's too long and we have to make 3 episodes.
It wasn't too long. It was too much. I have felt, I can sit in uncomfortable, but very, very uncomfortable. And I think I'd like to break that up because I think the third part has a lot of power but gets lost in the middle part.
Okay.
So we're going to break it up into 3 parts.
So I'm sorry. You're going to have to wait a very long time from the beginning till the end. Mm-hmm. But we have made an executive decision. There's a lot in this and none of it's palatable. So we're just going to serve it up in smaller lots. Before we get to the horror of that February night in 2000, it's important to understand the life that led Katherine Knight there. Was she born violent or was she made so? Piece by piece, shaped by a combination of horrific family abuse, systemic failures, and a society that often looked the other way. Some have speculated that she may have possessed certain pathological traits, tendencies, that could have influenced the way she felt and acted, though we'll explore some of this stuff further on. But while these traits may have been part of her nature, the nurture element undeniably played a significant role. The emotional neglect, violence, and chaos that surrounded her from early childhood undoubtedly forged the person that she became. When she killed her partner, John Price, she did so in a way that would haunt Australia forever. By that point, so many had already failed. The police failed, the mental health system failed, and her family failed. Katherine was born into the small town of Aberdeen in New South Wales, Hunter Valley, a place known more for its slaughterhouses or abattoirs. I think they use slaughterhouse in America.
Yeah,
but
we're abattoir. It's such a fancy word for such a terrible place, isn't it?
God.
Abattoir.
Yeah. Even when I drove past them, and I eat meat.
Mate, they have to exist. I just buy it from the shop and don't think about how it got there.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm going to make you think about it. So, yes, Aberdeen is known for its meat industry and the abattoir that obviously the farms send the animals to be processed. Katherine's mother, Barbara Rowan, was married to Jack Rowan, and together they had 4 sons. But Barbara, frustrated with Jack's drinking and gambling, began an affair with Ken Knight, a co-worker at the Aberdeen Meatworks. That affair produced 4 more children, including twins, Katherine and her sister Joy. Tragedy struck early when Katherine was just 4. Her stepfather Jack passed away. 2 of her half-brothers who had lived with him moved in with Barbara and Ken and their children, while the other 2 went to live with an aunt in Sydney. But what followed was anything but a happy homecoming. Katherine's father, Ken Knight, by all accounts, was a brutal man, an alcoholic and an open abuser. He terrorised Barbara with violence and intimidation. Black eyes and bruises became a constant in that household. The children watched and grew numb to it. It was normal to see their mother battered and bleeding. The horrors of her home life went far beyond what most could imagine. Ken repeatedly raped Barbara, sometimes as many as up to 10 times a day, and often in full view of the children. For Katherine and her siblings, there was no escape from the fear and confusion. The safety of home was shattered, replaced by a constant grim lesson in violence and power. The abuse left invisible scars, shaping the way they would see the world, relationships, and themselves.
So much empathy right now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of grey in here. Like, there's no black or white. And as we get there, you're going to understand where mine comes from as well.
Where your what?
My empathy in this situation. The messages Katherine absorbed were devastating. Violence was ordinary. Fear, violence and sex were intertwined. And her mother, deeply scarred herself, reinforced a worldview of hatred and survival. Barbara regularly shared the intimate details of her sex life and her resentment towards men with her children, teaching them both cynicism and helplessness. Later in life, when Katherine confided in her mother about a partner pressuring her into sexual acts that she did not want to perform, Barbara's advice was blunt. Just put up with it, stop complaining.
I have questions already. How do we know this?
When there's a trial, a lot of stuff comes out. I'm going to mention another podcast later on, if you're interested, that you can listen to.
I might be done after this.
You might be. But obviously when someone faces a criminal trial, the defence is going to put forward reasons why someone might be the way that they are.
So Katherine has answered these questions herself?
I don't know whether Katherine answered that question herself, but it is true within so many accounts. And this isn't the only thing that we're going to talk about that shows a really concerning dynamic between this daughter and her mum. Katherine's trauma didn't stop there. She claimed to have been repeatedly sexually assaulted by her half-brothers up to the age of 11. This abuse was later confirmed by family members when brought up during the trial. The physical punishments at home were also relentless. Her parents took turns beating the children with anything they could find: electrical cords, dog leads, and a large wooden plank hung above the kitchen door as a looming warning. Every day, every space in that home was a lesson in fear, control, and brutality. It was an environment that desensitised Katherine to violence, fused sex and aggression, and in her mind sowed the seeds for the person she would become. By the time she reached adulthood, she had witnessed abuse, endured sexual assault, and been taught that survival required ruthlessness. These were the forces that would culminate on February 29th, 2000, when 49-year-old Katherine Knight brutally murdered her partner, John Price. The aftermath of this event was unprecedented. The first responders, police officers who arrived on the scene, were left so traumatised that years later some were still seeking therapy to erase the visions of what they had found. The video footage of the crime scene remains locked away, too horrific for public viewing. And in the courts, Katherine Knight became the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. But none of this happened in a vacuum. Every system that might have intervened had failed. The police, the mental health system, and her family all had opportunities to stop the chain of escalating violence, and all failed. The story of Katherine Knight is not just the story of one woman's monstrous act. It's a story of cumulative failures, trauma, and the terrifying ways in which violence breeds violence. By the time Katherine Knight reached her teenage years, the trauma and violence of her home life had already carved deep grooves into her personality. School offered no escape. She attended Muswellbrook High School, but rather than blending in, she stood out, and not in a positive way. Katherine was a loner, but she was also a bully. Classmates later recalled her as someone who stood over smaller kids, intimidated them, and lashed out without much provocation. Her twin sister Joy shared the same streak. The two girls were fiercely loyal to one another. They would fight each other brutally, but if anyone else tried to take on one of them, the other would swoop in instantly to retaliate so they could protect each other. Together, they were a two-person wrecking crew, feared by their peers. Katherine's violence didn't stop at intimidation. She assaulted at least one boy at school with a weapon and was once injured by a teacher who had to defend themselves against her. Around town, people already knew about Katherine's dark moods. When she fell into one of them, you kept your distance. But they also knew another side of her. For as terrifying as she could also be strangely charming, polite, cheerful, and even warm. She was a contradiction in motion, capable of sweetness but prone to sudden eruptions of rage. By the age of 16, Katherine dropped out of school. She was basically considered illiterate, which wasn't unusual in Aberdeen at the time. For most kids in the area, school was just a placeholder until they could work in the meat industry. That was the town's lifeblood, and Katherine was no different. In 1974, at just 18 years old, Katherine finally secured what she called her dream job, working in the local abattoir. At first, she worked in the offal room, scraping blood, edible organs and bone marrow from animal carcasses. It was grisly work, but for someone who'd grown up in chaos, it was also strangely familiar. You don't want to do work experience there?
Am I looking concerned as you tell this story?
A little bit. Her co-workers noticed something unsettling. Katherine would wander up to the front of the production line to watch the animals have their throats cut. At first, they thought it was just curiosity, that she was eager to learn the process. But it became clear over time that she was fascinated, even driven by the sight of death. She spent long periods just watching the animals die. Soon Katherine earned promotions. She moved from watching to doing the killing herself. And while there's no humane way to kill, slaughterhouses at least aim to minimise suffering with quick cuts. But Katherine had her own way. Instead of a swift slice, she would nick an artery and let the animals bleed out slowly, prolonging their agony. This was no mistake. It was deliberate.
I just don't know how I'm going to sleep tonight.
I was just thinking maybe you need a bucket.
This is just the beginning.
Yeah, it is. Her skill with knives quickly became legendary. Katherine was promoted to boning and given her own set of butcher's knives. At home, she displayed them proudly, hanging the knives over her bed. She said, so they would always be handy if she needed them. Her obsession with knives was total. She loved them and she was unnervingly good at using them. Now, there is a clinical term for the kind of fascination that Katherine seemed to develop, and it's called piquerism. It refers to people who are aroused or deeply gratified by the act of cutting, slicing or stabbing. Whether Katherine ever fit this definition in a clinical sense is unknown, but her behaviour suggested something similar, a dark thrill linked to the act of piercing flesh. On top of her obsession, Katherine was known for her physical strength. In a town full of rough people, her strength was remarkable, and combined with her growing skill with blades, it gave her a dangerous aura. She wasn't just another slaughterhouse worker. She was someone who embraced the violence of the job, perfected it, and made it part of her identity. By her early 20s, Katherine Knight had become a woman defined by brutality, fascination with death, and mastery of knives. These were not just tools for her. They were extensions of herself, and they would soon move from workplace implements to weapons of terror in her personal life.
There's some signs there.
Couple of red flags. Katherine's first serious relationship was with a man named David Kellett, a co-worker she met at the abattoir in 1973. David had a reputation around town. He was a heavy drinker, he loved to fight, but most people described him as a decent guy. He'd get into brawls after a few beers, sure, but he wasn't cruel. And when he met Katherine, the two fell hard and fast. They were both only 18, and in a way they seemed like a natural match. He liked to fight, and she was already well known in Aberdeen for being the kind of woman who would throw fists at anyone who crossed her. But unlike most people David fought with, Katherine didn't just stand by. If David was in a brawl, she would literally jump in beside him, fist flying. To the locals, the two of them were like a pair of feral twins, inseparable and dangerous. In 1974, Katherine decided it was time to make things official. And when I say decided, I mean it literally. During a lunch break at work, she just basically told him, "We're getting married." And they did, the same year. The wedding itself set the tone for everything that followed. The couple arrived at the church on Katherine's motorcycle with David so drunk he could barely stand. And before the ceremony even began, David got a chilling warning from the woman who knew Katherine best, her mother Barbara. Later, David recalled her words. "The old girl said to me, 'Watch out. You better watch this one or she'll fucking kill you. Stir her up the wrong way or do the wrong thing and you're fucked. Don't ever think of playing up on her. She'll fucking kill you. She's got a screw loose somewhere.'" Solid words from your new mother-in-law. And Barbara, while probably not one to judge, was right. On their wedding night, after the celebrations, David woke up to Katherine strangling him and punching him in the face. The reason? He had only had sex with her 3 times. That, however, is not the most concerning part of this little equation. Katherine was furious because her parents had managed to have sex 5 times on their wedding night and David hadn't measured up. The fact that Katherine knew that, let alone found it aspirational or even competitive, gives a pretty strong indication of how messed up her family dynamic actually was. Somehow, David brushed it all off and tried to move forward, but this set the stage for a marriage steeped in violence. While David had described the early years as okay, the reality was anything but. Katherine was the aggressor in almost every fight. One incident occurred when Katherine was pregnant. David came home late from a darts competition at the local pub and Katherine snapped. And I don't think he was overly late, like maybe about 20 minutes. He'd made the darts finals. So he obviously had to stay to play at the final. So it wasn't like, he was 3 hours late. It was just a short little time late. By the time he walked through the door, she had set all of his clothes and shoes on fire and then hit him in the head with a frying pan so hard that it fractured his skull. He required hospital treatment and police wanted to press charges. But Katherine, ever manipulative, managed to charm David into dropping them. The violence didn't stop. David recalled waking up one morning to find Katherine straddling him, holding a knife to his throat. And still, he never once fought back. "I never raised a finger against her," he later said, "not even in self-defense. I would simply walk away." By May 1976, shortly after the birth of their first daughter Melissa, David had reached his breaking point. He fled Katherine, leaving his daughter in her care and moving to Queensland with another woman. But to Katherine, this abandonment was the ultimate betrayal and it triggered an explosive chain of events. Katherine threatened to cut up baby Melissa. She even swung her newborn daughter around by her ankle. Neighbours later reported seeing her pushing Melissa's pram down the street, violently smashing it into fences and posts. She was admitted briefly to St Elmo's Hospital in Tamworth, but she managed to talk her way out within just a couple of days. Soon after, Katherine placed her 2-month-old baby on the railway track knowing a train was due. While baby Melissa lay helpless, Katherine wandered off, stole an axe and began threatening people in town. Miraculously, the baby was saved by an old man known locally as Old Ted, who happened to be scavenging near the tracks. And we're going to talk a bit more about this stuff later, as in like opportunities for intervention. But here, fuck me, I was baffled that Melissa ended up back with her mother that very same night. And the nightmare didn't stop. Katherine armed herself with knives and took her baby to the home of a young slaughterhouse co-worker. Pretending Melissa was sick, she lured the boy's mother into giving them a ride to the hospital. When she agreed, Katherine said she just needed to pop home for a few things to take. When the woman arrived at Katherine's house with her children, Katherine was searching around the front yard. It was later reported that this is where she hid her gun, but it's believed that her father had come to Katherine's house and removed it, fearing for baby Melissa's safety. And while I don't celebrate this man, not one bit, I'm going to give him credit here because his actions likely saved innocent lives that night. When she couldn't find it, Katherine became enraged and pulled a knife and slashed the cheek of a 16-year-old girl who had arrived with her mother to help. Katherine then held the family hostage, demanding that they drive her to Queensland to find David. Her plan was to kill David and his mother. But some quick thinking on the mother's behalf led her to mention that they needed fuel and she would have to stop at the next petrol station. Katherine agreed to this because she needed to cash a cheque. At the petrol station, the family managed to escape and barricade themselves inside of an office. Katherine, holding her baby the whole time, used her bare hands to rip a massive blade off a tractor slasher. You know, like the mowers that are on the back of tractors? She ripped a blade off that and hacked her way through the door of the office, and she was only stopped when police arrived and they managed to use brooms to disarm her. Katherine was then committed to Morisset Psychiatric Hospital, where she told nurses that she intended to kill the mechanic who had repaired David's car, because in her mind that repair had allowed David to leave her. Despite this, she faced no charges. Melissa was placed into care with Katherine's parents. I don't know what's a better option. When police told David about the incident, he left his new girlfriend and came back to Aberdeen with his mum to support Katherine. Yeah. She was released into his care on August 9th, 1976, only a few days after her admission. Megan's making a face because she doesn't understand this, but I'm going to mention it, so save your questions. Lots of accounts of this story sensationalise this part, and I get it because originally my face looked like yours. But we have to remember there's a baby involved here. David may have feared for his own safety, but I bet he was equally concerned for his daughters. Not only with Katherine, but also with his child being placed in the custody of Katherine's parents. You would assume them being in a relationship, he would have some idea of what Katherine's childhood looked like. In so many accounts of domestic violence, the general question posed is, why don't you just leave? But life is not black and white. There's complexity to every situation, and we can't assume to know what anyone in this level of crisis is thinking. I listened to an interview with David's mother and his sister Sandy, and they both really cared about Katherine. And while it was obvious that there were issues, they had a concern for her safety and her well-being. To me, this isn't solely a David issue. It's not fair to ask, why didn't you just leave her in that hospital? He's not a psychiatrist. David would later say about her, and I quote his words, "She was the most wonderful wife you could wish for. Perfect mother, perfect housewife, but sometimes she'd just snap like a biscuit." Did that answer that face? It's often speculated if all of what came after could have been avoided if David didn't come to her rescue at this point, and I understand it, especially given the horrific outcomes. But I'm not willing to put that on David. This is a failure of the systems that were meant to protect those within our community. And unfortunately, this isn't the only place within this story where they fail. There are so many aspects of this that could have had criminal consequences, but instead they were handed over to the mental health system, who also failed to identify the real issues here. Maybe with time they could have seen more, but Katherine was Katherine, and we'll talk more about this a little bit later on as well. While family and friends have the deepest concern and the very best of intentions, we have to remember that at times professional intervention is necessary. Even clinicians are trained to know when they are not the right fit for a patient, and as a duty of care will refer them on. Even super skilled professionals know that they can't know all of the things, but someone here should have flagged that she needed something far more than family support. Because the violence never stopped. Right from the minute David took Katherine back to her parents to collect her things, Barbara obviously needed someone to blame other than herself, and so of course that person was going to be David. Barbara tried to confront David outside of her home. With his mother in the back seat of the car, she screamed at him to fuck off and leave her daughter alone, and then she tried to strangle him through the car window. Katherine, hearing the commotion, rushed to his defence, punched her own mother square in the face and knocked her out cold. This is like the day she was released from the hospital.
What were the expectations for mental health facilities in the 70s? Obviously, we know a lot more now, and I would like to think that the system would be different. But what
People fall through the cracks in the mental health system all the time, just as much now as they did back then. And I think sometimes it can come down to who the person is that you meet there. If you meet someone who is empathetic and caring and is willing to dive in, then the care that you receive might be different than if the first person you meet there is someone who is overworked and burnt out and at their absolute limit. And I can't speak for that time, but now you talk to anyone who is a mental health clinician and they will talk about the burnout. They will talk about the lack of funding. They will talk about people's ability to get access to care. The people who work in that industry are the same as in most industries. You burn out, you get exhausted.
I do understand that. I just don't
and if there's
understand
not
why
enough
she was
beds,
let out.
What if there wasn't enough beds? Like there's been people who've been sent to emergency and sent home because we don't have a bed for you. It can be simple as numbers.
Have improvements been made since?
Katherine's story, as far as the mental health system goes, is just a story that gets repeated on a weekly basis. And until governments prioritise this kind of stuff, and we talked about this in our suicide prevention episode, people are going to continue to die, whether it's at their own hands or at the hands of somebody who is clearly not fucking okay. So after this, David and Katherine moved to Queensland, where for a time they worked hard to try and make things work. Katherine found work again at the local meatworks, and in 1980 they had a second daughter. But by 1984, after years of escalating abuse, Katherine left David and moved back to Aberdeen to her parents' house and then into a rented house nearby. And this is where I'm going to leave you for part 1. We are going to talk about this more at the end of this series of episodes, but I don't want to wait until then to give you this information. Currently, there is a petition online for the nationwide implementation of Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, which is also known as Clare's Law. The scheme is named after Clare Wood, who was murdered by her abusive ex-boyfriend in 2009. It was formally rolled out in England and Wales in 2014 following the landmark campaign led by Clare's father, Michael Brown. The scheme would enable people to access vital information about a partner's history of abusive behaviour, supporting safer decisions and early intervention. The scheme has proven effective in the UK, New Zealand and Canada, with South Australia named as the global best. Despite this success, Australia still lacks a consistent national framework, leaving many vulnerable without this safeguard. If you feel compelled to be someone who contributes to us never doing a story like this again, I would encourage you to sign this petition. You can Google petition EN8178, or for more information, you can Google Clare's Law. The petition now, currently at this moment, when we're recording, has just under 8,000 signatures, and we need 20,000 to get it in front of government. So if you think that this is important, we would encourage you to jump online. It's something very, very simple that you can do that will help people to make informed decisions in the future. For Katherine, this is just the closing of one chapter in the brutal story of her existence. But for those who would come into her life after, it was the start of a nightmare. So many people who crossed paths with her would feel the ripple of her violence, the weight of her paranoia, the consequences of choices that had long ago escaped any sense of normal limits. The impact that follows wasn't just personal, it was generational. Her children, the family she harmed, the community around her, and even the first responders who would eventually confront the aftermath would all bear scars from the brutality of her actions. The road ahead would see Katherine tearing through more lives, more homes, more chances for the system to stop her, and every time she slipped through the cracks, until finally that path ended in one of the most brutal murders Australia has ever seen.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of If These Trees Could Talk. If you would like to access more about the places or information included in today's topic, please visit our website ifthesetreescouldtalk.com.au. If you would like to follow us on our adventures, check us out on Facebook or Insta. Our creative writer is Shannon Walters, and our podcast is produced at Bellevue Studio in the Hunter Valley with audio production by Megan Anderson. We love to hear your feedback, so please rate and review, and if you would like to hear more, please subscribe. We look forward to you joining us for our next adventure.